On a Montana hill in 1876, Crazy Horse, adorned in eagle feathers and clutching a war club, led 1,500 Sioux and Cheyenne warriors to obliterate 225 U.S. soldiers under George Armstrong Custer, his saber gleaming in the sun. This crushing native victory, fueled by Sitting Bull's vision and a desperate stand for their sacred Black Hills, shocked a nation. Yet, it marked the beginning of their end. How could 1,500 warriors triumph over a modern army, only to see their way of life vanish forever? In the mid-19th century, the Great Plains became a fierce battleground. The region split into two fronts: the Northern Plains, home to the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, stretching from the Arkansas River to the Canadian border, and the Southern Plains, dominated by the Comanche, Kiowa, and Apache. Over 40 years, these tribes clashed with a growing U.S. presence. By 1850, settlers poured into native lands, breaking treaties like the 1851 Fort Laramie Agreement, which promised Sioux control over the Black Hills. Historian D. Brown notes that these violations fueled a relentless cycle of conflict, as native peoples fought to protect their ancestral territories from an encroaching nation driven by manifest destiny. After the Civil War ended in 1865, the U.S. War Department transformed its military strategy. 10 cavalry regiments, totaling over 10,000 soldiers, were deployed to the plains under generals hardened by war. William Tecumseh Sherman, who torched Atlanta, and Philip Sheridan, who ravaged the Shenandoah Valley, led the charge. Their strategy was brutal. Total annihilation, Sheridan famously declared. The only good Indian is a dead Indian, a chilling testament to their intent. They targeted villages, food supplies, and even non-combatants to break native resistance. By 1866, over 1,200 troops were stationed at forts like Phil Kearny, built to protect the Bozeman Trail, a route cutting through Sioux hunting grounds. In 1871, the U.S. Congress passed a law that shattered native autonomy. The act stripped tribes of their status as sovereign nations, reducing them to subjects under U.S. law. No longer could they negotiate treaties as equals. This decision affected over 300,000 native people across the plains, forcing them onto reservations or into conflict. Historian Robert Utley argues this law was a turning point, as it erased diplomatic avenues and pushed northern tribes like the Sioux toward guerrilla warfare. Warriors, once seen as defenders of sovereign lands, now fought for their very existence against a government that denied their right to self-governance. On the 18th of November, 1864, a horrific massacre set the stage for escalation. At Sand Creek, Colorado, Colonel John Chivington led 700 U.S. Common EAS troops to slaughter over 100 Cheyenne, mostly women and children, despite their white flag of surrender. Cheyenne leader Black Kettle, holding a peace pipe, survived but lost his people. The attack, condemned even by some U.S. officers, sparked fury. Historian Ari Kelman notes that Sand Creek ignited a firestorm of retribution, uniting Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Sioux in a rare alliance. The massacre revealed the U.S. military's willingness to target civilians, a tactic that would haunt the Plains Wars. In early 1865, the winter offensive erupted. Over 1,000 Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Sioux warriors struck back, targeting Julesburg, a key settlement in northeastern Colorado near Fort Rankin. They burned buildings and looted supplies, killing 14 settlers and soldiers. For 6 weeks, they raided Wisconsin Ranch, Denison's Ranch, and Godfrey's Ranch, capturing figures like Susan Morris and her children. By February, they returned to Julesburg, torching what remained. This campaign, as historian Pekka Hämäläinen observes, showcased native mobility and coordination, holding the South Platte River Valley until they chose to withdraw north into Wyoming. Red Cloud, a Sioux leader with piercing eyes and a feathered headdress, waged a masterful campaign against the Bozeman Trail from 1866 to 1868. His warriors, numbering up to 2,000, targeted Fort Phil Kearny, a wooden fortress housing 400 soldiers. Using decoys and ambushes, Red Cloud disrupted supply lines, forcing the U.S. to abandon the trail. In 1868, after the forts were deserted, his warriors burned Fort Phil Kearny to the ground. Historian James Donovan calls this the only time a native leader forced the U.S. to capitulate, securing a rare victory that preserved Sioux lands until the 1870s. On the 21st of December, 1866, the Fetterman Massacre stunned the U.S. Army. Captain William Fetterman, wearing a blue uniform and wielding a saber, defied orders from Colonel Henry Carrington to avoid pursuing Sioux and Cheyenne warriors over Lodge Trail Ridge. Lured by a small group of decoys, including a young Crazy Horse, Fetterman led 81 soldiers into an ambush. Over 1,000 warriors emerged from gullies, annihilating the entire command in under 40 minutes. The bodies were scalped and mutilated, a grim echo of Sand Creek. Historian John Gray notes this as the Army's worst defeat by Native forces, exposing the vulnerability of overconfident commanders. In August 1867, the Wagon Box fight revealed the shifting tide of warfare. Near Fort Phil Kearny, 32 soldiers and woodcutters formed a corral of wagon boxes. When 800 Sioux warriors attacked, expecting an easy victory, they faced a new weapon: the Springfield Allen breech loading rifle. These rifles fired 10 rounds per minute, compared to the old muzzleloader's 3. The soldiers repelled 4 assaults, killing 50 to 60 warriors while losing only 3 men. Historian Gregory Mickno argues this battle showed how technology trumped courage, foreshadowing the Native disadvantage in future conflicts. In 1874, gold fever ignited new tensions. Prospectors flooded the Black Hills, sacred Sioux territory guaranteed by the 1868 Fort Laramie Treaty. Over 4,000 miners entered by 1875, violating the agreement. The U.S. ordered non-compliant Sioux bands, led by Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, to return to reservations by January 1876. When they refused, Generals Sheridan and George Crook launched a campaign with 2,500 troops. Historian Nathaniel Philbrick notes that the gold rush tore apart the fragile peace, setting the stage for the ultimate showdown at Little Bighorn. Before the Battle of Little Bighorn, Sitting Bull, clad in a breechcloth and holding a sacred pipe, performed a sun dance in June 1876. For 3 days, he bled himself and stared at the sun, seeing a vision of soldiers falling from the sky. This prophecy rallied 8,000 Sioux and Cheyenne, including 1,500 warriors, gathered for a sun dance festival. Historian Joseph Marshall III, a Lakota, writes that Sitting Bull's vision gave spiritual strength to a people facing extinction, uniting them for a historic stand against the U.S. Army. On the 25th of June, 1876, George Armstrong Custer, in a fringed buckskin jacket and wielding a revolver, led the 7th Cavalry to disaster. Commanding 617 soldiers, 30 scouts, and 50 civilians, he split his force into 3 units to attack a massive Sioux-Cheyenne encampment. Underestimating their strength, Custer sent Major Marcus Reno with 140 men to charge from the south and Captain Frederick Benteen with 125 to flank. Historian Stephen Ambrose calls this Custer's reckless gamble, as he ignored reports of the camp's size, believing he could crush the 1,500 warriors alone. The Battle of Little Bighorn unraveled quickly. Reno's charge met fierce resistance from 500 warriors, forcing a retreat with 40 men killed. Benteen, delayed in rough terrain, never reached Custer. Left with 225 men, Custer charged toward the village but retreated to Last Stand Hill when overwhelmed. Crazy Horse, painted for war and riding a swift pony, led multiple charges, breaking Custer's lines. By dusk, all 225 soldiers were dead. Historian Robert Utley notes that Custer's arrogance met its match in Native resolve, cementing the battle's legend. Crazy Horse's tactics at Little Bighorn were devastating. Leading 800 warriors in coordinated assaults, he exploited the terrain, using ravines to outflank Custer's men. His charges disrupted U.S. formations, allowing warriors to close in with clubs and lances. Sioux accounts, recorded by historian Thomas Powers, describe Crazy Horse as a shadow moving through the chaos, striking fear into soldiers. The victory, though, came at a cost. 60 to 100 Native warriors died, and the battle provoked a fierce U.S. response, signaling the end of their resistance. The Little Bighorn victory shocked the nation. Eastern newspapers, initially sympathetic to Native plight, called for vengeance. By 1877, the U.S. Army deployed 15,000 troops across the northern plains. Crazy Horse surrendered in May 1877 and was killed under disputed circumstances. Sitting Bull fled to Canada but surrendered in 1881. Historian Heather Cox Richardson argues that Little Bighorn galvanized U.S. resolve to subdue the Plains tribes, leading to relentless campaigns that broke their power within a year. On the 29th of December, 1890, the Wounded Knee Massacre ended the Plains Wars. At Wounded Knee Creek, 350 Sioux, led by ailing Chief Bigfoot, were intercepted by 500 soldiers of the 7th Cavalry. During a tense disarmament, a rifle discharged, triggering chaos. Soldiers fired Hotchkiss guns, capable of 50 rounds per minute, killing 128 Sioux, including women and children. The cavalry lost 25 men, many to friendly fire. Lakota historian Joseph Marshall III calls it the final wound to a dying culture, as the massacre extinguished the ghost dance hope and confined survivors to reservations. The Wounded Knee Massacre of 1890 marked the final, tragic chapter of the Plains Wars. The Sioux, once lords of the northern plains, saw their world collapse as 128 of their people fell under a hail of bullets and Hotchkiss shells. Their sacred buffalo herds, numbering 30 million in 1800, dwindled to fewer than 1,000 by 1890, and their lands were carved up by barbed wire and settler farms. Crazy Horse and Sitting Bull, with their unmatched courage and vision, fought to preserve a way of life rooted in freedom and harmony with the land. Yet, their victories at Little Bighorn and elsewhere could not stem the tide of U.S. expansion. Backed by 15,000 troops and advanced weaponry, the resilience of the Sioux and Cheyenne, as historian D. Brown writes, shines as a testament to human spirit, but it was crushed by a nation's relentless ambition. As we reflect on this painful history, we honor the native people's strength and mourn the loss of their vibrant culture. Their story compels us to ask, how can a nation built on such sacrifice ensure justice for those whose world was erased?